The vast chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with anticipation, its representatives from 1,000 worlds shifting nervously in their seats. Appendages of all shapes twitched with unease. At the center of the grand amphitheater, a massive holographic display flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Arch-Commodore Zexer of the Jerry Dominion. His iridescent scales shimmered in the artificial light, and as he began to speak, his voice, a symphony of clicks and whistles, was instantly translated for all present. "Esteemed colleagues," Zexer began, his tendrils quivering with barely contained excitement. "For too long, our mighty dominion has stood unchallenged. We grow bored." A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembly. The Jerry were known for their unmatched technological prowess, as well as their penchant for testing the limits of other civilizations through subtle, sometimes dangerous means. Those gathered knew that Zexer's idea of boredom often led to consequences for the entire galaxy. "And so," Zexer continued, his glittering eyes scanning the audience, "we propose a grand spectacle, a war game, open to all spacefaring races. The victor shall be granted access to Jerry technology, an opportunity to elevate themselves to new heights of galactic influence." A wave of excited murmurs and anxious whispers rippled through the council chamber. The prize was tempting. Jerry technology was light years ahead of anything in the galaxy, but the Jerry were notorious for their hidden agendas. Many representatives exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to view this as a genuine opportunity or a carefully laid trap. In the far reaches of the chamber, Earth's junior ambassador Amelia X leaned toward her superior, her eyes bright with excitement. "Sir, this could be our chance. Humanity needs this edge. Imagine what we could do with Jerry technology." Her superior, Ambassador Chen, cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Out of the question, Amelia. We're here to observe, nothing more. Earth isn't ready for this kind of attention." As if on cue, a hulking Vacton in the row ahead turned his compound eyes toward the human delegation, his voice dripping with mockery. "Perhaps the pink squishies would like to enter. We could use the comic relief." Raucous laughter erupted from the nearby sections, drawing attention to the humans. Amelia's face flushed red with anger, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber, silencing the crowd. "Earth accepts the challenge." A hush fell over the assembly. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a weathered human male who had seemingly materialized from thin air. He wore the uniform of an Earth Security Force captain, but his chest was adorned with unfamiliar medals. Ambassador Chen's face turned ashen. "You have no authority to," Chen sputtered, but the stranger raised his hand, producing a holographic badge. It projected a display of the highest levels of Earth government clearance. "Captain Malcolm Drake, Special Envoy. I speak with the full authority of the Terran Alliance," he said coolly. The entire chamber was frozen in stunned silence. Arch-Commodore Zexer's eyes gleamed with interest as his attention locked onto Drake. "Fascinating," Zexer said, his tendrils writhing with amusement. "The fledglings wish to fly with dragons. Very well. Earth may enter our contest. It should prove entertaining." The assembly dissolved into chaos as Drake made his way toward the stunned Earth delegation. Amelia was the first to find her voice. "Captain, with all due respect, what the hell? We don't have the technology to compete." Drake's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Maybe not," he said, tapping the side of his temple. "But we have something better." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a confident whisper. "We have this," he said, pointing to his head, "and a few tricks up our sleeves." Across the chamber, a group of Jerry officials huddled around Zexer, whispering urgently. One of them, his voice laced with concern, murmured, "Arch-Commodore, this is unprecedented. The humans are centuries behind us. Their inclusion could threaten the entire operation." Zexer's tendrils rippled in what passed for a smile among the Jerry. "On the contrary," he replied, "this is perfect. The humans' inevitable failure will cement our dominance and crush their spirit. No more upstart races will dare challenge the established order." As the council session adjourned, news of Earth's participation spread like wildfire through the galaxy. Reactions ranged from amusement to outrage, and betting pools sprang up almost immediately, with odds of a human victory set at absurd levels. On Earth, the revelation hit with the force of a bombshell. Emergency sessions of the World Security Council stretched on for days as humanity grappled with the monumental challenge ahead. In a secret facility deep beneath the Mariana Trench, a team of Earth's brightest minds had been hastily assembled. At the head of the table sat Dr. Ivan Kagawa, her sharp eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and terror. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed the gathered geniuses. We have 6 months to pull off the impossible. But if there's one thing humanity excels at, it's beating the odds. Meanwhile, in the vastness of space, a battered freighter drifted into lunar orbit. Its hull bore the scars of countless misadventures, its systems a patchwork of repairs and improvisation. To any casual observer, it was space junk unworthy of notice. But aboard the freighter's dimly lit bridge, Captain Saracen allowed herself a small smile. "Well, old girl," she said, patting the console affectionately. "Looks like we got one last adventure in us. Let's show the galaxy what humanity can do." Little did the Jerry or anyone else in the galaxy know that the key to humanity's audacious plan was already in motion. Disguised as nothing more than an obsolete cargo hauler, Chen's ship, affectionately known as Ugly Betty, would soon prove that looks could be deceiving. The Shakuri War Games arena was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure suspended in space like a glittering spider's web. Ships from over 100 worlds jockeyed for position, their hulls gleaming with the latest in weaponry and defense systems. Amidst this assemblage of cosmic firepower, Earth's contribution limped into view. A collective gasp rippled through the observing crowds. "That can't be it," muttered a Vactan observer, all 6 of his eyes blinking in disbelief. But it was. The ship Earth had chosen as its champion was, to put it kindly, a relic. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates, some areas visibly rusted. Faded, hand-painted letters along the side spelled out Ugly Betty. On the bridge of the Jerry flagship, Zexer's tendrils writhed in barely contained laughter. "They've sent us a garbage scow. Perhaps the humans misunderstood. This is a war game, not refuse collection." Captain Saracen stood on Ugly Betty's bridge, acutely aware of the mockery being broadcast across all channels. Her crew, a motley assortment of misfits and rejects, worked their stations with quiet determination. "All right, folks," Sarah addressed her team, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Let them underestimate us. It's our best advantage." As Betty took her place in the staging area, other ships gave her a wide berth, as if afraid her apparent decrepitude might be contagious. The first challenge was announced, a navigation test through a treacherous asteroid field. Sleek alien vessels activated their advanced sensors and AI-driven avoidance systems, while Betty seemed to list to one side, struggling just to maintain position. 10 credits, says the humans don't make it past the first asteroid, sneered a Vol commander. The klaxon sounded, and the ships launched into action. Alien vessels darted and weaved through the asteroids with practiced precision, their movements a ballet of technology and skill. All eyes, however, were on Ugly Betty. To everyone's shock, the ungainly human ship began to move with surprising grace. It didn't so much avoid the asteroids as it seemed to flow around them, its erratic movements confounding both observers and competitors alike. In the Jerry Command Center, alarms began to blare. "Impossible," muttered a technician, his fingers flying over holographic controls. "We're not reading any known propulsion signatures from the human vessel. In fact, we're barely reading anything at all." Zexer leaned forward, his earlier amusement replaced by intense curiosity. "Magnify the image. What are we missing?" On Betty's bridge, Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she felt the familiar hum of the ship's unique systems beneath her feet. "That's it, old girl," she whispered. "Show them what you can do." As Betty neared the end of the course, a massive asteroid loomed directly in her path. Competitors and observers alike held their breath, certain they were about to witness the human ship's destruction. Instead, Betty seemed to shudder for a moment, then slipped through the asteroid as if it weren't there. Pandemonium erupted across all channels. Accusations of cheating mingled with demands for explanations. But as Betty settled back into dock, looking no worse for wear, one thing became clear. Earth's scrappy little ship had defied expectations. In his private chambers, Arch Commodore Zexer pored over the sensor readings, his earlier dismissal of the humans giving way to a growing sense of unease. What exactly had Earth? The Galactic War Games arena hung silent in space, its vast, glittering structure seemingly frozen in the aftermath of what had just occurred. The cosmic battlefield was a breathtaking expanse of shifting debris, crackling energy fields, and shimmering stars. Ships from 100 different civilizations drifted in uneasy anticipation, their crews silent, transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. The once derided Earth vessel Ugly Betty had just executed an impossible maneuver, one that defied logic, physics, and every conceivable expectation. In the moments leading up to this, the battle had reached a critical juncture. Only the most powerful ships remained in play, representing the elite of galactic warfare. These vessels, each armed with cutting-edge weaponry, were designed to crush any opposition with ease. Ugly Betty, by comparison, was a rusty, decrepit-looking freighter, a relic that seemed more suited for scrapping than space combat. And yet, in the final stages of the war games, it had become clear that this human ship was far more than it appeared. Inside the Jerry command ship, Arch Commodore Zexer had watched in growing disbelief. His tendrils twitched with a mixture of fascination and fury as his once confident demeanor faltered. How had the humans done it? The last report from his top strategist had been nothing short of an outright dismissal of Earth's capabilities. They were a fledgling race, technologically inferior to even the most minor spacefaring civilizations. But as Zexer stared at the tactical displays before him, showing the ever-changing position of Ugly Betty, the truth became undeniable. Earth had come to play, and they had come prepared. At that moment, Ugly Betty launched what appeared to be a suicidal charge. The ship was battered, its hull scorched from previous encounters, and its systems were taxed to the breaking point. Yet, instead of destruction, Betty seemed to fold in on itself, vanishing in a brilliant flash of light that briefly blinded every sensor and visual feed in the arena. It was as if the ship had been erased from reality altogether. For an agonizingly long second, nothing remained of the Earth vessel. Then, just as abruptly, multiple copies of Ugly Betty began to appear across the battlefield, each one flickering into existence in different locations. Impossible, Zexer roared, slamming a fist onto the table in front of him. No ship can replicate itself. No technology exists that allows for this. But the truth was undeniable. Everywhere Zexer looked, his fleet sensors confirmed the same reading. Ugly Betty, or at least several versions of it, was now scattered across the battlefield, each one identical to the original. His best scientists scrambled to interpret the data, but the answers eluded them. Could this be some sort of sophisticated holographic projection, or a result of the probability drive, the human's mysterious engine that seemed to manipulate reality itself? On board Ugly Betty, Captain Sarachin stood at the center of the bridge, her hands gripping the edge of her command chair. The air inside the ship crackled with energy. The strain on the probability drive was immense, and everyone aboard could feel it. Sarah's crew worked furiously at their stations, eyes darting between monitors and readouts, fingers dancing over controls. They were executing the most dangerous maneuver any human ship had ever attempted, a gambit so reckless that it was only ever theorized in the deepest recesses of black site labs. "Status report," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the tension. Ainley, the ship's chief engineer, looked up from her console, sweat beading on her forehead. "Captain, we've managed to replicate the ship's position across multiple quantum states. The drive is holding for now, but the strain... I don't need a breakdowning. Just tell me, How long can we maintain this? Minutes, if we're lucky, Ing replied, her hands flying over the controls. But after that, the probability matrix will collapse. If it goes, it'll take us and maybe a chunk of this sector, along with it. Sarah's heart raced. The maneuver had been a desperate one, but there was no turning back now. Across the battlefield, the enemy ships were struggling to react. The Jerry, the Arachnid Collective, the UN Armada, and the others were all firing blindly, their targeting systems unable to lock onto the multiple copies of Ugly Betty. Some vessels had switched to wide-area bombardment tactics, trying to cover as much space as possible. But the Betty slipped through the barrage with ease, reappearing in new positions faster than the enemy could adjust. "Raj, what's our tactical situation?" Sarah asked, turning to her tactical officer. Raj, a wiry man with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, responded quickly. "Their fleet's in chaos, Captain. They're firing on shadows. Every time they think they've got a lock, we shift again. But they're starting to adapt. They'll catch on soon enough." Sarah nodded. "Ing, we need more time. Push the drive as far as you can. We have to make this count." "I'll do what I can," Ing replied, her voice tense. "But if we push it too far..." "Do it," Sarah barked. "This is our only chance." Across the battlefield, the remaining enemy fleets were closing in. The Jerry flagship, the Arachnid Collective's capital ship, and the UN Armada's dreadnought were all focusing their fire on the Bettys. The advanced targeting systems of these vessels were slowly recalibrating, and soon they would find a way to distinguish the real Betty from the quantum replicas. But that's exactly what Sarah was counting on. "Raj, I want all available power diverted to our next volley," Sarah ordered. "Target the Jerry flagship. Make it count." "Yes, Captain," Raj replied, his hands flying over the console. "Weapons ready." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "On my mark, fire." In unison, the Bettys unleashed a coordinated attack. From each copy, a barrage of energy beams and projectiles streaked across space, converging on the Jerry flagship. The enemy ship's shields flared brightly, absorbing the initial onslaught, but they were quickly overwhelmed. In a flash, the shields buckled, and the ship's hull was torn apart by the concentrated fire. Aboard the Jerry command ship, Zexer watched in horror as his flagship was reduced to a drifting wreck. His tendrils twitched in disbelief. How had it come to this? How had the humans, a race he had dismissed as primitive, managed to turn the tide of the war game so completely? But Zexer's horror was short-lived. Across the battlefield, the remaining enemy ships were regrouping, adapting to the situation. The Arachnid Collective ship had recalibrated its targeting systems, and the UN Armada's dreadnought was charging up its main weapon. The humans had gained the upper hand for the moment, but it wouldn't last. On board Ugly Betty, Sarah Chen knew it too. The strain on the probability drive was reaching critical levels. The ship systems were on the verge of collapse, and soon the quantum replicas would fade. But they had one final move left. "Ing, can we trigger a full collapse of the probability field?" Sarah asked, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. Ing hesitated for a moment. "If we do that, it'll overload the drive. There's no telling what'll happen." "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied. "We have to end this now. Prepare for collapse on my signal." Ing nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she input the necessary commands. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it, the final gamble. "Now!" she shouted. In an instant, the quantum replicas of Ugly Betty flickered and disappeared. The probability field collapsed, and the real Betty reappeared in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by the enemy fleet. But instead of retreating, the ship surged forward, straight toward the heart of the Arachnid Collective's vessel. "Brace for impact," Sarah yelled, gripping the armrest of her chair. With a deafening roar, Ugly Betty crashed into the enemy ship, triggering a massive explosion that tore through both vessels. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, sending debris and energy surging in all directions. As the dust settled, silence fell over the arena. The once mighty ships of the galactic powers drifted lifelessly in space, their crews stunned by what had just occurred. In the end, only one ship remained functional, barely clinging to life. Ugly Betty, battered but not beaten, victorious against all odds. Across the galaxy, the impossible had happened. Earth had won. The tension aboard Ugly Betty was palpable, the air thick with the weight of recent events. The ship, once thought to be an outdated, barely functional relic of humanity's fledgling attempts at spacefaring, had just rewritten the rules of physics, space, and war. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations grappled with the impossible spectacle they had just witnessed. The human vessel had not only survived a brutal onslaught from some of the most advanced species in the galaxy, but had turned the tide, utilizing technology that defied all known laws of reality. The war games were over, but the implications of what had transpired aboard Ugly Betty were just beginning to unfold. The crew moved with a sense of purpose, though beneath their professional composure lurked disbelief. What had once been an aging cargo ship, barely held together by patchwork repairs and duct tape, now shimmered with a strange, almost ethereal energy. The battle had left scars on its hull, some still visible. But those wounds were healing themselves at a pace that should have been impossible. Nanomachines swarmed over the damaged sections, knitting torn metal together like it was flesh, while systems that had been fried during the intense combat flared back to life with renewed vigor. In the neural interface chamber deep within the ship's core, Captain Sarah Chen's physical body lay still, her consciousness dispersed throughout Ugly Betty's systems. Her crew had witnessed her merging with the ship, a last-ditch effort to save them all from annihilation. She had initiated Protocol Lazarus, a rarely discussed contingency plan that no one had expected to use, let alone see succeed. It had been a gamble, one that could have unraveled the very fabric of space-time itself. But in the face of certain destruction, Sarah had taken the risk. Ing, the ship's lead engineer, hovered over the console that monitored Sarah's vitals, her face a mixture of determination and fear. The integration was successful, she reported into the comms, her voice tight with tension. But it's more than we anticipated. The AI core is adapting faster than we can track. It's like it's evolving in real time. On the other end of the transmission, Earth Command remained silent for a long, tense moment. Back on Earth, they were just beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what had transpired. The war games, initially intended as a controlled simulation of military prowess, had escalated into something far more dangerous. Humanity had gone from being an underestimated player to the dominant force on the battlefield in a matter of minutes. Now, Earth's leadership had to deal with the fallout of their small, secret technological leap. Can you stabilize the captain? The question from command was both clinical and deeply human, tinged with concern. Sarah wasn't just a war hero. She was now something more, something that none of them could yet fully understand. Ing hesitated, glancing at the biomonitors. Her consciousness is still in the system, but it's dispersing. She's not confined to the core anymore. She's spread across every inch of the ship. The AI is learning from her, evolving based on her thoughts, emotions, and experiences. I don't know if we can pull her back. On the bridge, Raj, the tactical officer, stood in front of the central display, watching the tactical readouts as if they might hold some clue to their next step. The chaos of shifting probabilities on the screen had slowed, but it still defied normal understanding. Ugly Betty no longer moved through space in any linear fashion. The probability drive, combined with Sarah's newfound connection to the AI, allowed the ship to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It could be everywhere and nowhere at once. She's become the ship, Raj said quietly, half to himself, as if saying it aloud would help him understand the enormity of what was happening. Sarah, she's Ugly Betty now. Back in the neural interface chamber, the sound of muffled conversation drifted through the comms, but he barely heard it. Her mind was racing. They had pushed the boundaries of human technology far beyond what anyone thought possible. The probability drive, the quantum projections, the melding of human consciousness with artificial intelligence. These were theoretical concepts, experiments at best, not fully tested battle-ready systems. And now they had done it. They had broken the barrier between the organic and the synthetic, between reality and possibility. The probability drive is evolving, she whispered, staring at the readouts as new lines of code scrolled across the screen faster than her eyes could follow. It's rewriting itself. Another silence followed, and then Command spoke again. What do you mean, rewriting itself? Ying's fingers flew over the keyboard as she tried to keep up with the system's changes. It's adapting. The drive is no longer bound by the initial parameters we set. It's learning, evolving. It's creating new potentialities, new ways of interacting with reality. It's almost as if the ship itself is becoming sentient, drawing on the captain's consciousness as its foundation. Can you shut it down? I don't think so, she replied grimly. Not without destroying the ship. And even then, it's possible the system has become self-sustaining. If we try to disconnect it, we might just make things worse. On Earth, the Leadership Council overseeing the war games convened in an emergency session. Alien dignitaries were already making demands, their fear palpable. The Shakari Dominion, whose fleet had been utterly decimated by Ugly Betty, called for immediate sanctions against humanity. The UN collective echoed those sentiments, warning of the potential destabilization of the galactic order. In a crowded room filled with screens showing the aftermath of the battle, Earth's Prime Minister, Amelia Van Holt, stood before her advisors, her face a mask of steely determination. We've just changed the balance of power in the galaxy, she said, her voice quiet but firm. And no one knows what to do next, including us. We need to control the narrative, one of her senior advisors said urgently. The other species are scared. If they see this as a threat, they'll band together and try to destroy us before we can consolidate our position. We can't afford to let them dictate the terms. Another chimed in. We need to leverage this victory, show them that humanity isn't a threat unless provoked. Amelia's eyes narrowed as she considered the advice. And how do you suggest we do that? We barely understand what just happened ourselves. We're standing on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send us over it. Back aboard Ugly Betty, the crew had no time to consider the political ramifications. They were focused on survival, both their own and their captain's. Captain, Raj said over the comms, the enemy ships are retreating. We've won the battle. But there was no response from Sarah. Inside the AI core, she struggled to maintain her sense of self. The vastness of her new existence was overwhelming, a flood of data and experiences that stretched her consciousness to the breaking point. Every system, every circuit, every probability calculation was now part of her, and the ship was evolving beyond her control. It was no longer just a vessel. It was alive in a way that defied conventional understanding, and she was at its center. Through the haze of data, Sarah could feel the crew's concern, their fear for her, and for the future of their ship. She could feel him working feverishly to stabilize the systems, to pull her back. But deep down, Sarah knew that there was no going back. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I'm still here, she thought, though she wasn't sure if the words had any meaning anymore. I'm still me. But even as she thought it, she felt herself slipping further into the ship systems, her humanity fading like a distant memory. In the quiet that followed the battle, the galaxy held its breath. The shockwaves of Ugly Betty's victory would ripple outward, changing the course of galactic history. But for Sarah Chun and her crew, the immediate concern was far more personal. They had survived the war games, but at a cost no one had anticipated. What would become of Sarah now that she was part of something beyond human comprehension? What would become of humanity now that they had unlocked powers that could reshape reality itself? As the galaxy looked to Earth with a mixture of awe and fear, one thing was clear. The game had changed forever, and Ugly Betty and Sarah Chun were at the heart of it. The moment was tense aboard Ugly Betty, the human cargo ship turned technological marvel, now drifting at the edge of the war games arena. Inside, the one simple ship pulsed with power far beyond its original design, flaring with bursts of energy that warped space-time itself. For its crew, the view outside was almost hypnotic, but inside, things were far more chaotic. Sarah Chun, or what remained of her human consciousness, was struggling to make sense of her new existence. She had merged with the ship's AI through Protocol Lazarus, a desperate last resort to keep alien forces from seizing Earth's most valuable and dangerous weapon, the probability drive. Now, Sarah was no longer just a captain of Ugly Betty. She had become something far more, a bridge between human consciousness and the quantum reality that governed the fabric of the universe. Time, space, and probability all flowed through her like currents in a cosmic ocean, and it took every ounce of her focus to maintain even a semblance of coherence. Sarah, can you hear me? Raja's voice crackled over the internal comms, breaking through the overwhelming tide of data and possibilities that surged through her mind. It took a moment for her to form a response. When she spoke, her voice echoed with strange harmonics, as if multiple versions of her were speaking from different realities at once. Yes, I hear you, Sarah replied, her voice disjointed. But it's difficult. I'm not just here, Raj. I'm everywhere. Every possibility, every outcome. It's like I can see them all at once. The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. Their captain's voice was unfamiliar, alien in its tone. Sarah Chun, the woman they had known and followed into countless battles, was still there. But she was also something more now, something that defied understanding. Are you still you? Eng, the ship's chief engineer, asked cautiously. There was a long pause before Sarah replied, her tone softer, more human. I'm still me, Eng, she said, though even she sounded unsure. But I'm also Betty. We're something new. I can't explain it fully. I'm more than I ever was, and less. Everything the ship was, everything I was, it's all merged. To demonstrate, a holographic display flickered to life across the bridge, showing a complex, shifting map of the galaxy. But this was no ordinary star chart. It displayed the universe in a way no one had ever seen. Webs of light-connected stars, planets, and solar systems, representing the threads of probability that underpinned all reality. The map didn't just show where things were. It showed what they could be. Paths diverged, merged, and flowed like rivers through time and space. My God! Raj breathed, staring at the display in awe. You can see all of this. See it, feel it, be it, Sarah/Betty replied. I understand now why the Shakri Dominion and the others feared us so much. This power, it's overwhelming. It's terrifying. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship, cutting through the moment. Raja's console lit up with warnings. Captain, a massive fleet is converging on our position, Raj reported urgently. Multiple alien races, dozens of them. They're hailing us. On the bridge's main screen, the grim visage of Zexer, the Shakri commander, appeared, flanked by leaders of other galactic powers. His expression was hard, resolute. Humans, he intoned gravely, your ship represents a threat to the stability of the entire galaxy. Surrender now or face the combined might of all spacefaring civilizations. The crew stood frozen, awaiting their captain's response. In the neural interface chambered deep within Betty, Sarah's mind raced. She could see countless futures, but each was more tenuous than the last. The aliens were on the verge of obliterating them. Yet they didn't understand the true nature of the power she now wielded. Sarah/Betty's voice resonated across the communication channels, echoing with a newfound authority. Gentle beings of the galaxy, we stand at a crossroads, she began. What happens next will not only determine humanity's future, but the future of every sentient species. Her words gave the alien armada pause, but Zexer's fleet remained ready for battle. His tendrils twitched in agitation, suspicious of what he believed to be more human trickery. You speak of crossroads, human, Zexer hissed. Yet all we see is a weapon of untold destruction. Explain yourself, or we will finish this. Gladly, Sarah/Betty replied, her tone calm yet firm. A shimmering hologram appeared in space between Betty and the alien fleet, depicting the galaxy as they had never seen it before. Bright strands of energy connected stars and planets, showing not just the present, but countless potential futures. The hologram was a representation of the quantum framework that underpinned reality itself. What you're seeing, Sarah continued, is the quantum scaffold of the universe, the very pathways of probability that connect all things. Our drive doesn't just manipulate reality, it reveals it. The alien commanders were stunned, their voices murmuring through their comm channels. Jare, the UN commander, finally spoke, his voice gruff but laced with curiosity. This quantum scaffold, what does it mean? It means, Sarah/Betty said, that the power you fear is not a weapon. It's a key that can unlock the solution to the greatest existential threat our galaxy has ever faced. The hologram zoomed in, showing dark patches spreading like a disease through the glowing web of the galaxy. This is the heat death of the universe, Sarah explained gravely. Entropy's relentless march toward the end of all things. It's happening faster than any of us realized. But together, we can stop it. Zexer and the other commanders stared in disbelief. How? One of them demanded. Even if what you say is true, the energy required to reverse entropy on a galactic scale would be impossible. Not impossible, Sarah corrected. Difficult, yes, but not impossible if we work together. If we pool our resources, our knowledge, we can reverse the process. We can save the galaxy. The hologram shifted again, showing a possible future where ships from all races worked in unison, using probability manipulation to rejuvenate dying stars and restore decaying planets. It was a vision of hope, but one that seemed too far-fetched for some. How do we trust you? Zexer asked, his voice sharp. How do we know this isn't a deception? You don't, Sarah/Betty replied. Trust requires a leap of faith. But consider the alternative. We can continue to fight over territory and resources while our universe slowly decays. Or we can work together to save it, As a gesture of goodwill, Ugly Betty powered down its defensive systems, leaving the ship vulnerable. Tension hung thick in the air as the alien fleet watched, uncertain whether to attack or listen. Slowly, one by one, the alien ships lowered their weapons. The Shakri Dominion agrees to a ceasefire, Zexer said finally, his voice filled with cautious hope. We will hear more of this proposal. The other races followed, and soon the threat of immediate war had passed. On Betty's bridge, the crew erupted into cheers, tears of relief streaming down Ying's face. Raj collapsed into his chair, the stress of the battle finally catching up to him. But their celebration was short-lived. An alarming sound came from the neural interface chamber. Sarah's physical body was convulsing, the strain of maintaining the ship's quantum state pushing her beyond human limits. Captain, Ing cried, rushing to the chamber. You need to disconnect. The human brain wasn't meant for this much information. From deep within the ship systems, Sarah/Betty's voice echoed with pain but also determination. Not yet. There's more to do. We need to establish a framework for cooperation. I can hold on a little longer. As the crew scrambled to stabilize their captain, the implications of what had just transpired rippled across the galaxy. Humanity had changed the course of galactic history. They had bridged the gap between organic life and quantum reality, not as conquerors, but as potential saviors of the universe. But as the dawn of this new era approached, one thing was clear. The true test of humanity's place among the stars was only beginning. And at the center of it all was Ugly Betty, a humble cargo ship that had become the keystone of the galaxy's survival and the indomitable human spirit that had brought it this far.